Hey there, boys and girls. Welcome to your Edpuzzle homework tonight, dealing with explaining lesson 10.4. So, just like all of our other explaining lessons, we're going to work through the book together so that we really understand what it's asking us to do. So, if you've not done so already, please turn to lesson 10.4 in your books. That's page 366 and 367. And make sure as we're going through this together, you're filling things in. That way, it can help you when you get to the next page. All right, so our learning targets for tonight are I can represent hundredths as decimal fractions using an area model. So again, we're going to focus on that hundredths place and how those are called decimal fractions. And our second target is I can relate common fractions, mixed numbers, and decimal fractions together. So basically that second target is saying you can understand how those things stand for or represent the same type of thing. All right, so jumping right along here for explain lesson 10.4. Again, we see our place value chart here with our base 10 blocks. And again, we know in place value as you move to the left, everything gets 10 times bigger. So if I start here in the ones place, I know I get 10 times bigger to go to the tens place because I need 10 of those ones to make a 10. But if I'm moving to the right, I'm really cutting that thing into 10 pieces or dividing it by 10. For example, if I take that tens rod we were talking about and I break it into 10 pieces or divide it into 10 groups because I'm moving to the right, really I would have 10 ones. And that's where our decimal points or our decimal places come into play too, because when I take that one whole and I break it or divide it by 10, now I have tenths. And if I take one of those tenths and divide it by 10, now I have hundredths. Okay. And we've kind of seen those pictures of this place value chart already as we've been working through these decimal lessons. All right. So really what you're kind of thinking about here again, when we're talking about hundredths, if we're looking at that ones cube, like with a magnifying glass, and we're looking at all the little teeny tiny pieces that make that up, we know that it takes 100 of those little teeny tiny pieces, or it takes 100 hundredths to make up one whole ones cube. So keep that in mind. Kind of think about that magnifying glass is showing us there. It's showing us all those little pieces that would be on the inside of that whole thing. All right, so what we're going to be focusing on today is we're going to be writing down decimal numbers or writing down mixed numbers that go along with what we've shaded in our area models. So for example here, we know that each large square, so each big thing up here stands for one whole. So I can see here that I have one whole square colored in, but then I've got some extra things after that. Okay, so the first thing we could do is we could write this as a decimal number like I did down here. And notice I kind of color coded it to help you understand what I'm showing. Again, we see our place value chart. We know we've got the ones place, that's the wholes. And then when you move back to the right behind that decimal point, that's when you get into your extra pieces, like your tenths and your hundredths. So we know we have one whole thing colored in blue. That's the whole. Then we also know that we have four complete tenths or four complete columns. So that means we would have four tenths. And then after that, we've got five of those little teeny tiny squares or five of those hundredths. So I'm going to put all of those digits into the correct split, into the correct spot or the correct place. Okay. Now, what I really have to think about though is those four tenths that are highlighted here by red, those really stand for 40 hundredths because inside of each of those tenths are 10 little squares like we can see right here. There would be 10 of these little squares inside of those tenths. So really there are 40 of those little teeny tiny green squares. So we could also write this as a mixed number. We know that we have one whole thing shaded or colored in. And then we've got 45 or 4 tenths and 5 hundredths. We've got 45 hundredths shaded in as well. And again, if we write this using words, we're going to write it just like we did back at the beginning of the year and we did different forms like word form. We can write this number in word form as well. This would be 1 and again, you could put the word whole in there if you want to. You could say one whole and, but you just really have to say one, but you need that word and because that's separating your extra stuff. 1 and 45 hundredths. And again, you need to make sure you're putting that word hundredths in there, because if you don't and you just put 1 and 45, that's going to look completely different. Okay, so keep that in mind as we move forward tonight into our book. So if you've not done so, we are going to be down at the bottom of page 366 working together, because this is really going to help explain what you're doing on the next page when it's time for you to do it on your own. Okay, so our step up number 1 here says each large square is 1 whole, just like it was on our last slide. We know every big square is worth 1 whole. The directions tell us to color the squares to show the number, then write the number on the expanders as a mixed number. Well, we've got 2 and 28 hundredths. So the first thing I know here is the 2. So I know I need to color in 2 wholes, because that comes before the word and, so that would be like before my decimal point if I was writing this with my digits. So 2 wholes and 28 hundredths, which means I need to color in 28 little teeny tiny squares. And I could do that by counting all 28 of them, or just like we said, we know that that 20 would be 2 full tenths, because there'd be 10 pieces in the first column and 10 pieces in the next column. So I could count them all, or I know that each column would be worth 10. So I do 10 and then 20, and then I'd have to color in 8 extra little squares after that. All right. And now if I was going to copy this onto my expander, I know that I have 2 ones, or I have 2 wholes, and then I have to think about all those extra pieces I have, or how many hundredths I would have, and we know that I've got 28 of those extra little teeny tiny pieces. Now, if I was going to fold up this expander and just write it with a decimal point, again, it's going to look very similar. I know I'm going to have 2 wholes. Then I put my decimal point in there to know I'm separating my wholes from my extra pieces. So 2 and then I'm going to have my 28. Because again, this would be your tenths place, and that's how many tenths you have colored in. You've got 2 of them, and then 8 extra little teeny tiny squares. And the last way I could write this would be as a mixed number, and I know that I've got 2 wholes and 28 extra pieces, and it takes 100 to make that whole. So this would be 2 and 28 hundredths. And again, all of these look very similar because they all stand for the same number. They all represent the same thing. Okay, nice work. Keep that in mind, because that's what you're going to be doing here on your own here in a second. So now I'm going to turn you loose onto page 367 on your own. And your responsibility today is to do step up number 2, and you need to fill in all of these extra parts for A, B, C, and D. So again, if I zoom in here for A for you, they've already shaded in the area model. You have to copy down the missing digits onto your expander and then for your mixed number. When you get down to B, though, they don't shade in the area model. They give it to you on one of your expanders, so you have to complete the missing parts. Okay, do your best on those. We'll go over those later on. Have a good night. Make smart choices.